What if the person you underestimate most becomes your greatest teacher about courage? What if the student you dismiss as weak carries within her the strength to transform not just her own life, but an entire community's understanding of what it means to be powerful? This is the story of Maya Johnson, a 15-year-old girl who walked the halls of Riverside High School with a white cane in one hand and dignity in her heart. To her classmates, she appeared vulnerable, a quiet black girl navigating the world without sight, an easy target for those who mistook her gentleness for weakness. To her tormentors, she represented everything they had been taught to diminish: black, disabled, and seemingly defenseless. But Maya carried secrets that her bullies could never see. Behind her composed exterior lay 5 years of rigorous martial arts training, discipline forged in dojos where sight mattered less than heart, and a strength that had been tested in ways her classmates could never imagine. She was unknown to everyone at school, a third-degree black belt in karate and a certified instructor in adaptive self-defense techniques for visually impaired individuals. This story unfolds in 2019 in a suburban school district where research shows that 37% of black students report being bullied, where 25% of black students with disabilities face suspension compared to just 11% of their white peers, and where the intersection of racism and ableism creates a perfect storm of discrimination. It's a story that begins with humiliation, but transforms into a powerful testament to the resilience of the human spirit and the unexpected places where justice can be found. Maya's journey would ultimately challenge everything her community thought they knew about strength, disability, and the courage to stand up for what's right. Maya Denise Johnson was born with Leber congenital amaurosis, a rare genetic condition that left her with minimal light perception from birth. Her parents, Marcus and Diane Johnson, were determined that their daughter's blindness would never define her limitations. Marcus, a high school history teacher, and Diane, a social worker, had learned about the intersection of racism and ableism from their own experiences and were committed to raising Maya with both pride in her black heritage and confidence in her abilities. Growing up in the suburban community of Riverside, Maya's early years were shaped by a family that refused to accept society's diminished expectations. The Johnsons filled their home with stories of black disabled leaders like Harriet Tubman, who led enslaved people to freedom despite living with epilepsy, and contemporary activists who challenged systems of oppression. They understood that black disabled history represents multiply marginalized individuals who have always fought against compounded discrimination. Maya's introduction to martial arts came at age 10, not as a response to bullying, but as part of her parents' commitment to her physical and mental development. Inspired by success stories like that of Johnny Tai, a blind martial arts instructor who overcame bullying and abusive circumstances to become a respected teacher, the Johnsons enrolled Maya in Master Chun's Adaptive Martial Arts Academy. Master David Chun, himself a second-generation Chinese-American who understood marginalization, had developed a program specifically designed for students with visual impairments. His approach emphasized that martial arts like judo require no adaptation for blind practitioners, allowing them to train alongside sighted students on equal terms. Maya had an incredible ability to read movement through sound and vibration, Master Chun later recalled. She could sense an opponent's intention before they fully committed to an attack. Maya's training intensified when she discovered adaptive self-defense programs designed specifically for blind and disabled individuals. These programs emphasize developing independence, self-confidence, spatial orientation, and tactile sensitivity skills that aligned perfectly with Maya's growing mastery of traditional martial arts. By age 13, she had earned her black belt in karate and was training other visually impaired students in self-defense techniques. However, the racial and social climate of Riverside High School in 2019 reflected broader national patterns of discrimination. The school district, despite its suburban affluence, struggled with implicit bias and systemic inequities that particularly impacted students who were both Black and disabled. Maya's presence challenged multiple assumptions simultaneously. She was academically gifted, maintaining a 4.0 GPA, physically capable, and socially confident. Yet she faced the double burden of racism and ableism that characterizes the experience of many Black disabled students. The school's administration, while not overtly hostile, demonstrated the kind of benign neglect that often passes for inclusion. Maya was assigned to regular classes, a positive step, but received minimal support for navigating the complex social dynamics that her multiple identities created. Teachers, though well-meaning, often oscillated between treating her as exceptionally inspiring for doing ordinary things and forgetting to accommodate her visual impairment during lessons. Maya's closest friend was Jessica Martinez, a Latina student who had transferred from a more diverse urban school and immediately recognized the isolation Maya faced. Jessica became not just Maya's friend, but her unofficial advocate, helping her navigate the unspoken social hierarchies that defined Riverside High. Together, they formed a bond that transcended the divisions the school's culture tried to impose. Family had chosen not to publicize Maya's martial arts achievements, believing that her strength should speak for itself when necessary. Maya wore her skills quietly, the way she wore her other talents, present but not performative, confident but not boastful. Her parents had taught her that true power didn't need to announce itself, and that her greatest strength lay not in her ability to fight, but in her capacity to choose when fighting was necessary. This foundation, a loving family, rigorous training, academic excellence, and deep personal confidence, would soon be tested in ways that would challenge not just Maya, but her entire community's understanding of justice, prejudice, and the courage required to stand up for what's right. The trouble began on a seemingly ordinary Tuesday in October 2019, during Maya's sophomore year. She was navigating the crowded hallway between classes when she accidentally bumped into Jake Morrison, a junior known for his aggressive behavior and casual cruelty. Jake, the son of a local police officer, had never directly confronted Maya before, but she had heard his voice among those who made jokes about the blind girl when they thought she couldn't hear. "Watch where you're going, Ray Charles," Jake sneered, his voice loud enough to draw attention from nearby students. Maya paused, her white cane steady in her hand. She had faced casual ableism before, but something in Jake's tone carried an additional edge of malice. "I'm sorry," she said calmly. "The hallway is crowded. I didn't see you there." Her calm response seemed to irritate Jake further. Perhaps he had expected tears or cowering the reaction he was accustomed to provoking. Instead, Maya's composure seemed to challenge his need to dominate. "Maybe you shouldn't be in normal classes if you can't handle normal things," he said, his voice rising. "This isn't a special needs daycare." The hallway began to quiet as students sensed confrontation brewing. Maya felt the familiar weight of dozens of eyes upon her, the uncomfortable tension that arose whenever her disability became the center of attention. She had learned to navigate these moments with grace, but Jake's comments carried undertones that went beyond simple ableism. "I belong here just as much as anyone else," Maya replied, her voice steady but firm. She began to move past him, but Jake stepped deliberately into her path. "Do you, though?" Jake's question dripped with the kind of casual racism that suburban schools often harbored beneath their surface of liberal tolerance. "I mean, really? You can't see. You probably got here through some diversity program. And now you're taking up space that should go to normal students who can actually contribute something." The intersection of racism and ableism in Jake's words was unmistakable. Maya felt her jaw tighten, but her martial arts training had taught her to remain centered, even under pressure. She understood that Jake was trying to provoke her into a reaction that would justify whatever escalation he had planned. "Everyone contributes in different ways," Maya said, attempting to step around him again. "Now please let me get to class." But Jake wasn't finished. He had found an audience, and Maya's refusal to be diminished seemed to fuel his aggression. "You know what your problem is?" he said, moving to block her path again. "You act like you're better than everyone else. Like being blind makes you special. But you're just a charity case who can't even see how pathetic you are." The crowd of students had grown larger, forming a loose circle around the confrontation. Maya could hear whispered conversations, phones being pulled out to record, and a general buzz of excitement that accompanied any conflict at school. She also noticed the absence of any adult intervention, a pattern she had observed before when incidents involved students like her. What happened next would be seared into the memory of everyone present. Jake, emboldened by the audience and Maya's apparent passivity, reached out and grabbed her white cane. "Maybe if you didn't have this thing to hide behind, you'd have to face reality." The white cane, Maya's primary tool for independence and navigation, represented far more than a mobility aid. It was her connection to the world, her means of safely moving through space, and a symbol of her competence and self-reliance. Jake's attempt to take it was not just physical aggression. It was an attack on her autonomy and dignity. Maya's response was instantaneous and precise. Years of training had taught her that when someone threatens your primary means of navigation and safety, immediate action is required. As Jake attempted to wrench the cane from her grasp, Maya stepped forward rather than back, using his forward momentum against him. In one fluid motion, she pivoted on her left foot, maintained her grip on the cane, and swept Jake's supporting leg with her right foot. Jake fell hard to the linoleum floor, the sound echoing through the suddenly silent hallway. Maya stood over him, her cane firmly in her hand, her breathing controlled and steady. The entire exchange had taken less than 3 seconds. "My cane is not a toy," Maya said quietly, her voice carrying clearly in the stunned silence. "And I am not your victim." A crowd erupted in shocked murmurs and excited chatter. Phones that had been recording captured every moment of Jake's humiliation. For many students, it was the first time they had seen Maya as anything other than the quiet, academically gifted girl who happened to be blind. Her competence, confidence, and skill had been revealed in a way that challenged every assumption they had held. Jake scrambled to his feet, his face flushed with embarrassment and rage. Being defeated by the girl he had targeted for her perceived weakness was more than his ego could bear. "You're gonna pay for that, freak?" he hissed, but his voice lacked the authority it had carried moments before. "Is there a problem here?" The voice belonged to Mr. Rodriguez, the assistant principal, who had finally arrived to investigate the commotion. Jake immediately began his attempt to reframe the narrative. "She attacked me. I was just trying to help her, and she went crazy." "And attacked me?" Maya remained calm, understanding that this moment would likely determine how the incident was officially recorded and addressed. "Jake grabbed my mobility cane," she explained to Mr. Rodriguez. "When someone tries to take away a blind person's cane, it's not just harassment. It's a safety issue. I defended myself." Several students began speaking at once, some supporting Jake's version of events, others describing what they had actually witnessed. The presence of multiple phone recordings meant that the truth would eventually emerge, but Maya understood that the immediate response from school administration would reveal much about how seriously they took the intersection of racism and ableism in their building. As Mr. Rodriguez attempted to sort through the conflicting accounts, Maya stood quietly in the center of the crowd, her white cane steady in her hand. She had not sought this confrontation, but she had faced it with the strength and skill that years of training had provided. What she didn't yet know was that this single moment of self-defense would trigger a series of events that would transform not just her own life, but the entire school community's understanding of justice, capability, and what it truly means to stand up for what's right. The incident in the hallway was over, but Maya's real fight against systemic discrimination, institutional indifference, and societal prejudice was just beginning. The aftermath of the hallway incident revealed the deep-seated biases that permeated Riverside High School's culture and administration. Within hours of the confrontation, Maya found herself sitting in the principal's office alongside her parents, facing a disciplinary committee that seemed more concerned with managing public relations than addressing the underlying issues that had led to the conflict. Principal Sandra Walsh, a well-meaning but ultimately ineffective administrator, had spent the morning reviewing phone footage and witness statements. The video evidence clearly showed Jake grabbing Maya's cane and her defensive response. Yet the school's initial impulse was to treat the incident as mutual combat requiring equal punishment for both students. "We have a zero-tolerance policy for violence," Principal Walsh explained to the Johnson family. Regardless of what provoked the incident, Maya used physical force against another student. "We're looking at a 3-day suspension for both students involved." Marcus Johnson, drawing on his experience as an educator, recognized the institutional blindness at work. "Are you seriously suggesting that my daughter defending herself from an assault on her primary mobility aid is equivalent to the attack itself?" Diane Johnson, her social work background providing insight into systemic discrimination, was more direct. "This is exactly the kind of response that leads to Black disabled students being suspended at rates of 25%, compared to 11% for white disabled students. You're punishing Maya for refusing to be a victim." The school's response reflected broader patterns of discrimination that civil rights organizations had documented extensively. When Black disabled students defend themselves or advocate for their rights, they are often characterized as aggressive or non-compliant, leading to disciplinary measures that further marginalize them within educational systems. Maya's parents immediately began advocating for their daughter, drawing on resources from organizations that supported Black disabled students and families. They filed formal complaints under the Individuals with Disabilities Education Act and Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act, documenting how the school's proposed response constituted discrimination based on both race and disability. Meanwhile, Maya faced a different kind of struggle within the school's social ecosystem. The video of her defending herself had spread rapidly through social media, creating competing narratives about what had occurred. Some students celebrated her strength and skill, recognizing her as someone who had stood up to a known bully. Others, particularly those aligned with Jake's social circle, characterized her as dangerous and unpredictable. The martial arts community that had nurtured Maya's development rallied around her during this difficult period. Master Chun provided written testimony about Maya's character and training, emphasizing that her response had been both appropriate and restrained. He explained that Maya had used the minimal force necessary to stop Jake's assault and had not pursued any additional action once the threat was neutralized. Representatives from adaptive self-defense organizations also spoke out in Maya's support. They emphasized that taking away a blind person's mobility cane was not just harassment, but a form of assault that threatened their safety and independence. One instructor noted, Maya's response was textbook self-defense. She protected her primary tool for navigation and independence, used appropriate force, and stopped as soon as the threat was neutralized. The incident also revealed the inadequacy of Riverside High School's anti-bullying and bias response protocols. Despite having policies on paper, the school lacked the training and cultural competency to address incidents that involved multiple forms of discrimination. Teachers and administrators struggled to understand how racism and ableism intersected in Maya's experience, often addressing one aspect while ignoring the other. Jessica Martinez, Maya's closest friend, became an unexpected advocate during this period. She organized a student support group that included Maya's classmates from various backgrounds, creating a coalition that could speak to different aspects of the discrimination Maya faced. Their advocacy helped shift the narrative within the school, making it harder for administrators to treat the incident as an isolated conflict between individual students. The Johnson family's advocacy efforts extended beyond the school district to state and federal levels. They connected with national organizations focused on educational equity and disability rights, sharing Maya's story as an example of how intersectional discrimination operates in schools. Civil rights attorneys began reviewing the case, recognizing its potential to establish important precedents about how schools respond to self-defense by disabled students of color. During this period, Maya continued attending classes while the disciplinary process unfolded. She found that her relationships with classmates had shifted significantly. Some students who had previously ignored her now approached with newfound respect, while others seemed nervous or uncomfortable around her. Teachers struggled with how to interact with her, uncertain whether to acknowledge what had happened or pretend nothing had changed. Maya's martial arts training had prepared her for physical confrontation, but navigating the complex social and emotional aftermath required different skills. She worked with a counselor who specialized in supporting disabled students of color, learning strategies for managing the stress of being constantly scrutinized and debated by her school community. The most painful aspect of the struggle was the way some community members questioned whether Maya belonged in mainstream educational settings. Local social media groups debated whether students with disabilities should be integrated into regular classrooms, with some arguing that Maya's presence created safety risks for other students. These discussions revealed the deep-seated ableism that integration efforts had not fully addressed. Throughout this period, Maya's parents provided unwavering support while also helping her understand the broader implications of her situation. They explained how her experience connected to the historical struggles of Black disabled individuals who had fought for educational access, civil rights, and social recognition. They shared stories of activists like Brad Lomax, who had organized disability rights protests while managing multiple sclerosis, and Fannie Lou Hamer, whose voting rights advocacy continued despite the challenges of polio. As weeks passed, it became clear that Maya's case would require sustained advocacy and potentially legal action to achieve a just resolution. The school district's initial response had revealed systemic problems that extended far beyond one incident in a hallway. Maya's struggle had become part of a larger fight for educational equity, disability rights, and racial justice issues that would require community-wide engagement to address effectively. The resistance Maya faced also strengthened her resolve and clarified her sense of purpose. She began speaking more openly about her experiences, helping other students understand the intersection of racism and ableism. Her voice, once quiet in school settings, became stronger and more confident as she realized that her story could help others facing similar challenges. 3 weeks after the initial incident, Maya's situation reached a critical turning point during what should have been a routine school board meeting. The Johnson family had requested time to address the board about their daughter's case, hoping to achieve a resolution that went beyond individual punishment to address the systemic issues the incident had revealed. The meeting took place on a cold November evening in Riverside High School's auditorium. Maya sat between her parents in the front row, her white cane resting against her chair as dozens of community members filled the seats behind them. The audience represented the deep divisions Maya's case had exposed: supporters who viewed her as a courageous advocate for justice, and critics who saw her as a disruptive force that threatened school safety. School board president Patricia Morrison Jakes and though this connection had not been publicly disclosed, called the meeting to order with barely concealed hostility. The board had spent weeks trying to contain what they viewed as negative publicity for the district, and Maya's request to address them publicly represented an unwelcome escalation of the controversy. When called to speak, Maya approached the podium with the same calm confidence she had displayed in the hallway confrontation. She had prepared remarks, but as she stood before the microphone, she realized that the moment called for something more personal and direct. "My name is Maya Johnson, and I am a student at Riverside High School," she began, her voice clear and steady. "3 weeks ago, a classmate attempted to take away my white cane, my primary tool for independence and navigation. When I defended myself using skills I learned through years of martial arts training, I was threatened with suspension. Under a zero-tolerance policy that treats victims and aggressors as equally responsible for violence." The auditorium was completely silent. Maya continued, "I want to talk about what happened that day, but more importantly, I want to talk about what's been happening every day since I started attending school in this district." Maya began describing her daily experiences, the casual, ableist comments that teachers ignored, the lowered expectations disguised as accommodation, the social isolation that came from being seen as either inspirational or pitiable rather than simply human. She spoke about the intersection of racism and ableism, explaining how her identity as a Black disabled student created unique challenges that the school's policies and culture were unprepared to address. "I didn't ask to become the center of a controversy," Maya said. "I just asked to be treated with the same respect and dignity that any student deserves. When someone tried to take away my independence, I protected myself. I used minimal force. I stopped as soon as the threat ended, and I took no additional action. This is what self-defense looks like." As Maya spoke, something unexpected began happening in the audience. Students who had witnessed the hallway incident started standing up one by one to show their support. Jessica Martinez was first, followed by other classmates who had seen Maya's daily strength and resilience. Even some students who had initially supported Jake's version of events stood up, recognizing the truth in Maya's words. But the most powerful moment came when Maya shifted from describing her own experience to challenging the broader community's assumptions about disability and strength. "Everyone wants to know how a blind girl learned to defend herself," Maya said. "They're amazed that someone like me could have martial arts skills. But here's what they don't understand. My blindness didn't make me weak. The low expectations, the casual discrimination, the assumption that I couldn't handle normal challenges, those things were designed to make me weak. My training didn't give me special powers. It gave me back the strength that prejudice tried to take away." Maya's voice grew stronger as she continued, "I stand before you not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a student demanding justice. Not just for myself, but for every student who has been made to feel that they don't belong, that their differences make them less valuable, that their strength doesn't count because it doesn't look like what you expected." The auditorium erupted in applause, with most of the audience rising to their feet. Even some school board members appeared moved by Maya's testimony, though Patricia Morrison maintained her stony expression. What happened next surprised everyone, including Maya. Jake Morrison, who had been sitting in the back of the auditorium with his parents, suddenly stood up and walked toward the front of the room. The crowd quieted, unsure what to expect. "I want to say something," Jake announced, his voice shaking with emotion. He approached the microphone area, his face flushed with a mixture of shame and determination. "Maya's right," he said, his words barely audible at first. "I grabbed her cane because I wanted to humiliate her. I said those things because I thought she was an easy target. I was wrong about everything." Jake's public acknowledgement of his actions and Maya's strength created a moment of transformation that no one in the auditorium would forget. His admission validated Maya's account completely and demonstrated the power of her response to change. Not just her own situation, but the heart and mind of someone who had tried to diminish her. The climax of Maya's story was not a dramatic physical confrontation, but this moment of truth-telling that forced an entire community to confront its own biases and assumptions about strength, disability, and justice. The immediate aftermath of the school board meeting marked the beginning of significant changes at Riverside High School and throughout the district. Jake Morrison's public acknowledgement of his actions created a watershed moment that made it impossible for administrators to continue treating the incident as mutual combat between equally responsible students. Within 48 hours of the meeting, the school district dropped all disciplinary actions against Maya and issued a formal apology, acknowledging that their initial response had been inappropriate and discriminatory. More importantly, they committed to comprehensive policy reforms, addressing how the district would handle future incidents involving intersectional discrimination. The policy changes that emerged from Maya's case became a model for other school districts facing similar challenges. The new protocols required mandatory training for all staff on the intersection of racism and ableism, established clear procedures for investigating bias-related incidents, and created accountability measures to ensure that disciplinary responses did not perpetuate discrimination against marginalized students. Maya's story also catalyzed broader changes within the school's culture. Student-led initiatives emerged to address ableism and racism, with peer education programs that helped classmates understand different forms of discrimination and bias. The martial arts club that Maya eventually joined became a space where students with and without disabilities trained together, breaking down assumptions about physical capability and strength. Master Chun's Adaptive Martial Arts Academy experienced unprecedented interest following Maya's case, with dozens of new students enrolling in programs designed for individuals with various disabilities. Maya became a peer instructor, sharing her skills with other blind and visually impaired students, while also training alongside sighted classmates who wanted to learn from her expertise. The legal precedent established by Maya's case had implications far beyond Riverside. Civil rights organizations began using her story in training materials and advocacy efforts, demonstrating how self-defense by disabled students of color should be understood and supported rather than punished. Educational policy researchers documented the case as an example of effective family advocacy and community organizing around intersectional discrimination. Perhaps most significantly, Maya's experience led to the establishment of a district-wide program modeled after the One Touch Self-Defense Project, providing adaptive self-defense training to students with various disabilities. The program emphasized not just physical techniques, but confidence-building and advocacy skills that helped participants navigate discrimination and bias. Jake Morrison's transformation became another important element of the case's resolution. Rather than simply serving a suspension, he participated in a restorative justice process that included extensive education about ableism and racism, community service with disability rights organizations, and ongoing dialogue with Maya and her family. His public support for policy changes helped convince other students and community members who had initially opposed reforms that changes at Riverside High School attracted national attention from educational researchers and civil rights advocates. Maya was invited to speak at conferences about educational equity and disability rights, sharing her story with audiences who were working to address similar challenges in their own communities. Her articulate advocacy helped shift conversations about disabled students from charity-based approaches focused on accommodation to justice-based approaches focused on equity and inclusion. Maya's academic performance continued to excel throughout the controversy and its aftermath. She graduated as valedictorian of her class, earned a full scholarship to a prestigious university, and was accepted into a dual-degree program in law and social work. Her college application essay, which described how defending herself in a high school hallway had taught her about the power of standing up for justice, resonated with admissions committees and scholarship reviewers. The transformation extended to Maya's family as well. Marcus and Diane Johnson became sought-after speakers and consultants on educational advocacy for Black disabled students. Their experience navigating the complexities of Maya's case provided them with expertise that they shared with other families facing similar challenges. 5 years later, Riverside High School's transformation was complete enough that it became a site for educational equity training programs. Maya returned as a guest speaker during her college breaks, addressing new classes of students and staff about the ongoing work required to create truly inclusive educational environments. The resolution of Maya's case demonstrated that individual acts of courage and resistance, when supported by sustained advocacy and community organizing, could create lasting institutional change. Her story became proof that strength comes in many forms, that justice is possible even in imperfect systems, and that the most powerful transformations often begin with one person's refusal to accept discrimination as inevitable. Maya Johnson's story teaches us that true strength is often invisible until the moment it's needed most. Her journey from a quiet student navigating daily discrimination to a powerful advocate for justice illustrates the resilience that exists within marginalized communities and the transformation that becomes possible when that resilience is recognized and supported. The intersection of racism and ableism that Maya faced reflects challenges experienced by millions of students across the country. Her case reminds us that discrimination is not always dramatic or obvious. It often manifests in lowered expectations, casual comments, and systemic policies that treat defensive actions by marginalized students as equally problematic as the aggression that provoked them. Maya's martial arts training provided her with more than self-defense skills. It gave her confidence, discipline, and a deep understanding of when to use strength and when to show restraint. Her response to Jake's assault was measured, appropriate, and ultimately transformative, not just for herself, but for everyone who witnessed it. The broader lesson of Maya's story extends beyond individual empowerment to collective responsibility. Real change came not just from her personal courage, but from the sustained advocacy of her family, the support of her community, and the willingness of institutions to acknowledge their failures and commit to reform. Today, Maya continues her advocacy work while pursuing her education and career goals. She serves on the board of directors for several disability rights organizations, mentors other young advocates, and continues training in martial arts. Her story has inspired legislation in several states addressing how schools respond to self-defense by disabled students, and her advocacy continues to challenge assumptions about disability, strength, and justice. Maya's legacy reminds us that heroes don't always announce themselves with fanfare. Sometimes they walk quietly through our communities with white canes and boundless dignity, waiting for the moment when their hidden strength can serve not just their own protection, but the cause of justice for everyone who has ever been underestimated, dismissed, or told they don't belong. Their strength has always been there. We just needed to learn how to see it.